The vowels were put in so that the meaning of the text would be absolutely fixed. And so it basically has been, in Hebrew at least, but only for the last 1,000 years. We can't know exactly what the biblical authors intended us to read. We can know only how it was read in the late Middle Ages. That's the Bible. And this text, the Leningrad Codex, that's not the whole thing, by the way. That text is the basis for all modern translations. Right? All modern translations are based on this one manuscript. Terrific. But what if the manuscript has typos? Here's a famous one. Now, those of you who don't read Hebrew might look at the Hebrew that I've got there and be like, but I underlined the word in question. You might still have trouble seeing what the typo is, but it's the letter all the way to the left, which in Hebrew is the last letter because we read Hebrew right to left. But you can see, right, that last letter up there on the left is a rounded, nice thing. And this one down here is a little bit more squared off. A little tick to the right. Okay, you got it. That's a pretty easy typo to understand in Hebrew, right? Like, it's just, I just went a little bit too far or a little bit not far enough with my top line there. Easy enough to see how that typo would happen. Typos may be wrong, right? That's a scripto? I don't know. Something. Anyway, mistake. It's easy enough to see how that mistake would happen, but the result is that the text is a little bit silly, right? This is Genesis 22. This is the sacrifice or near sacrifice of Isaac, and he's just like been told not to do it because he's been faithful. It's Abraham. We'll get there. And Abraham lifts his eyes, and like he's going to see the ram that is going to be the sacrificial replacement for Isaac. And in the Leningrad Codex, in the top one, it says he lifted his eyes, and there was a ram behind. It's like, I like to think about I like to imagine the text like a movie, and I can't get there. It's like a ram behind. Now, the alternative, the one on the bottom, is a little bit more reasonable, right? There was a ram. Right? He lifted his eyes, and look, a ram, right? A ram, right? Right? That one makes a lot more sense. And the thing is, every other manuscript, every ancient translation, the Syriac, which is a dialect of Aramaic, and the Greek, and the Aramaic translations, and virtually every other Hebrew manuscript of the of Genesis has this correct, right? They have the one on the bottom. It's really just the Leningrad Codex that made the mistake on the top there, that has the ram behind Abraham. But that's the manuscript that became the Bible. So the King James says he saw a ram behind him, as do King James related texts like the ASV and the ESV, right? It's a typo. But if you know only the King James, you know this as the Bible. Okay, fine. Medieval vowels might not be the best guide. Typos happen. But the consonants, presumably, we could be secure about, right? I said they've been like stable forever, right? So again, our Bibles are based on this 11th century AD manuscript. But there's also the thing you may have heard of called the Dead Sea Scrolls. A nice picture of some Dead Sea Scrolls. And, they preserved copies of biblical books too. The Dead Sea Scrolls did, famously. And here's the bummer about the Dead Sea Scrolls, depending on how you look at it. Their versions of the biblical texts aren't always the same as ours. There's some differences, like, are not very important or meaningful, right? They spell things differently. Okay, I don't care how you spell a word. Sometimes words are flipped. Sometimes there are typos, etc. That stuff, fine. But there are more substantial differences in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Here's an example. This is Exodus 24, right at the beginning, right? So the MT stands for Masoretic text. That's our standard Hebrew Leningrad Codex text. Has God saying to Moses, come up to Yahweh with Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu and 70 elders. And the Dead Sea Scrolls there has Aaron, Nadav, Abihu, Eleazar, and Itamar and 70 elders, right? That's not a typo. That's 2 extra people who got to see God, right? That's a pretty big deal, right? Some changes are worse still, right? In the middle of Exodus 18, the Dead Sea Scrolls inserts, 10 verses that takes out of Deuteronomy 1. Right? They're messing around with the text, but like that's what the text they have. So the Dead Sea Scrolls are the oldest text we have of the Hebrew Bible from the 2nd century BCE. Again, oldest text, but not complete, right? But the Septuagint, right, which you'll see as LXX here and there, right? The Septuagint, the Greek translation, is also super old, right? The 3rd century BCE. And the Septuagint, bless its heart, is not a translation of the same Hebrew text that we use today. Some differences, again, are minor, right? A little wording here and there. But some are pretty huge. Jeremiah in the Septuagint is a 6th shorter than it is in the Hebrew text. So, I don't know, like, I hope that the entirety of your faith isn't based on that 6th of Jeremiah, but like, it's a pretty substantial, right? The Septuagint was translating, right? The Greek translators were translating a text of the Bible. They were translating it from Hebrew, but they're translating a Hebrew text that's different from our Hebrew text. We think of our Bibles, when you pick up and read in church or home, as the Bible. But why? Shouldn't we give more credit to the older witnesses to it? Shouldn't the 2nd century BCE Hebrew text be more authoritative than this one we use from the 11th century CE? I'm not really going to answer that question, right? My point, if it's not clear, is that the Hebrew Bible doesn't really exist. Right? The Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint and the Leningrad Codex all disagree, and there are, of course, other manuscripts and versions and translations out there. The decision as to which is the text of the Hebrew Bible is a critical judgment. Right? And the practical ramifications of this are important. Adherence to any translation or version or words as the authentic Bible or the authentic Word of God, more on that in a moment, any adherence like that is problematic. Our English Bibles, every one of them, our English Bibles are translations of a single 11th century manuscript with its typos, with its 2,000 years later decisions about what the text should mean, and with absolutely no recognition that there are other versions of the Hebrew text that have better claims to antiquity and that are often starkly different.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך, יומם השמש לא יקקה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to this week's World Alliance of Qara'im Torah study. I am Hakham Melech ben Yaakov of Karaite Insights and the World Alliance of Qara'im. And this week we are going to be doing Parshat Emor, which is Leviticus 21 through 24, basically chapter 21, 22, 23, and 24 of Leviticus. So let me set that up, and while I do, you can enjoy the music.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם.
Okay, we're back. Alrighty. Now I think I have some more technical problems solved. I might have been muted before, I'm not even sure. But at any rate, here we are. So we will continue. Oops. So we are now in Leviticus chapter 22, verse 32. Let me just make sure this is set up correctly. It is. We'll do it this way a little bit more. Okay. So, ולא תחללו את שם קודשי, ונקדשתי בתוך בני ישראל, אני יהוה מקדישכם. המוציא אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני יהוה. Verse 23, وَيْدَبِرْ يَحْوَى الْمُشَى لَمُور دَبِرْ الْبَنِي إِسْرَائِيل وَأَمَاتَ عَلَيْهِمْ مُعَدَي يَحْوَى أَشَرْ تِقْرَؤُوا. Oh, well, here we are. Here's Leviticus 23. I didn't, sometimes you take it out of, this is actually in context. I'm usually so used to taking this chapter out of context because I refer to it so many times. These are the festivals, the Mo'adim, the yearly festivals, well, the weekly festival, including Shabbat, right? And it is interesting that well, we'll see. Okay, that Shabbat is called a Moed, right? Because these are the Moedei Yahweh, and also called a Mikra Kodesh, a holy convocation. Okay, so a Moed. Well, let's examine this word a little bit. Moed. Right, so it's usually translated as an appointed time or meeting, right? Ohel HaMoed is the tent of meeting. So what's the underlying root for it? So I assume it's ait. I could be wrong. So here, there's a reference to ya'ad. So ya'ad, to appoint. See, I'd always thought the underlying root was, so mo'ed. Let me just think about this for 1 second. So the underlying, right, I had always assumed was either ed or et. Well, it couldn't be et. That wouldn't make sense, right? Because et would have a tough at the end. So mo'ed, you could make the case, I guess, that it's from the underlying root ed, which means a witness. Okay, so mo'ed is like, witnessing together or something like that. But I guess that doesn't make sense either, right? I guess technically you could make the argument that it also comes from ed, and that since ed and ed are the dalid and the tuf are made in similar parts of the mouth, that the tuf became that the tuf, not the tuf, the tet became a dalid, or the tet switched to a dalid, and therefore a similar word was created. But let's not go in this direction. So according to here, it comes from ya'ad. Okay, so ya'ad, here they translate this, the BDB, it translates it as a point. Okay, so let's look at where some of this occurs. All right, let's take the first instance here. So ya'ada. So this is Exodus 21:8. So this is Parshat Mishpatim. Actually, the first chapter after the Ten Commandments is Exodus 21. So Exodus 21:8. So it's a whole bunch of lists. I mean, it's a list of laws, right? Starting in verse 1. Ve'ela Mishpatim. So in 8 we have Im ra'a be'ene adoneha asher lo ya'ada. So this is talking about ish et bito, and a man sells his daughter le'ama as a maidservant. She will not go out the way that the slaves go out. In other words, if she's sent away, okay. Okay, asher lo ya'ada. So if she is evil, it doesn't literally mean evil. If she's not pleasing in the eyes of her master, asher lo ya'ada, to which he appointed her, ya'ada. A hey with an ikud is the subject, or the preposition object, I should say, of her. So appointed her. So he appointed her to him, is basically what this says. So who's the he, who's the her, and who's the him? It seems the he is the father. Okay, so the father appointed her, right? Because it was the father who sold the daughter to someone else. Okay, so he appointed her to him. So the father appointed the daughter to the master, right? He sold his daughter as a slave, basically. Okay, and this is saying, this is saying, "Wahifdah il'am nochri lo yimshol." Okay. Actually, right. Yeah. Okay. So hevdah, so to redeem her to a foreign nation, he does not have the power to do. Limachra, limachra bi lo yimshol limachra bi bigdola. Okay. So if he cannot sell it to a foreign nation because in doing so he will have betrayed her. Okay. So I just want to make one correction. So from the context here, im livno yi adena. Okay, so if he appoints her to his son, and he had the same word ya adena. Okay, so I think in this case, let me just go back over verse 8. Im rabe ene adonai asher lo ya ada. So I'm sorry. I think the subject here is not the father, but is actually the master. In other words, the master took this woman for himself. Okay. He appointed her to himself. Okay. The father sold his daughter to someone else, preferably an Israelite or ostensibly an Israelite, and he appointed her to himself. In other words, he took her as a maidservant. Okay. So I don't think the subject here, I take it back. The subject here is not the father. The subject here is the master to whom the daughter was sold by the father. Okay. At any rate, we have the verb here, ya'adah, right? He appointed her to himself, okay? And so according to the BDB, this is where we're getting the word mo'ed from, okay? We also see the same word here, wa'im livno ya'adenah, right? If he appoints her to his son, mishpat banot ya'aseh la, then basically she's treated like his daughter, okay? Im aharet yikachlo she'erak suta anota yira. That she's to be treated like a daughter. If that son takes another wife, then she is not to be her food, her clothing, and her sexual pleasure are not to be reduced. Okay. At any rate, so that's an example of where the verb ya'ad is used. Maybe we can find one more example. Nodati lacha, so that's already in terms of meeting Iva'ed. Nodati sham livnei Yisrael. Excuse me. Oh boy. Okay. Ha'aidut. So now here's a valid question: is the word Iva'ed related to the word aidut? Okay, let's look at this. And see what we can find, okay? So here, this is the Ark of the Testimony, right? So here they translate it, Aidut, as the Ark of the Testimony. Let's click on this word, Aidut. So Aidut is testimony. And now it's going to probably bring us to the word Aid. So Aid is a witness. Okay, and we see that in many different places. I'm not going to chase that one down. But Aid is a witness. Okay, let's just read one verse. For instance, this is the covenant that's made between Jacob and Lavan at Gal Aid. And so now we see that so the word Aidut traces back to the word Aid. But the word mo'ed does not trace back to the word Aid. It traces back to the word ya'ad, at least, again, according to the BDB. Okay? So is there any relationship between ya'ad and Aid? Well, I suppose, again, one could make that claim because yud is one of those, even though it takes the form here as a of a consonant, and it is an integral part of the three-letter root ya'ad, right? It's not a letter that can drop in or drop out. It's an integral part of ya'ad. But still, I guess one could make the claim that the yud here is actually superfluous and that this is actually related to eid, that ya'ad is related to eid, but I don't see any, at least looking through the BDB here and through the Strongs, I don't see any indication of that, okay? Let's just see if there's any indication here anywhere. Yeah, I don't see it at all. What's up? To fix upon forms of eid. So here's all no adim, no ad, no hadu. So I don't see any indication of that whatsoever. So what I'm going to conclude here, and again, whenever I conclude something, it's always kind of, shall we say, temporary or preliminary conclusions. Maybe evidence comes. Oops, I think I just closed that by mistake. Oh. Did I? No, I'm good. Okay, so once again, so this is Eid, and this is Ya'ad, right? So my preliminary, or shall we say intermediate conclusion at this point is that we can trace the word Mu'ed back to the word Ya'ad, okay? And not back to the word Eid, and certainly not back to the word Eit, which means time, right? Because one could say Mu'ed is a time of meeting. Maybe it's related to the word Eit. Maybe the tet changed to a Dalid. There are some people who would say that those changes can be made, but I tend to say that unless it's some kind of proof that the consonants would have to be exactly the same. Although one might say that in earlier forms of Hebrew, that you could have those kind of interchanges between consonants. I don't see any evidence for that, certainly not here. Okay, so that's what we're going to leave it at. So Mo'ed can be traced back to Ya'ad. We saw an example of Ya'ad, okay, in Exodus 21. What was it again? In Exodus 21:8, okay, regarding an Israelite girl who is sold as a maidservant to another Israelite man, okay. So Mo'ed is related to Ya'ad, okay, to a point. So that's why here in Leviticus 23, when it says Mo'ed, it's usually translated as appointed times, okay. Hope that makes kind of sense. It's a little bit complicated. These things, when I check them out, I'm checking them out for myself, because every day you're learning something new in Torah. You're tracking things down and trying to understand more. So, okay. Shabbat Shalom, Ariella, and Shabbat Shalom, Ephraim. So let's move on. Any questions? Any comments so far? Alrighty then. So we are in Leviticus 23. It's kind of weird when you're reading through the Tanakh and you come across, or you're reading, chapter to chapter, and you come across, as I said before, Leviticus 23, because so many times I'm referring to this chapter, right? Because we speak, especially as Karaites, we speak so often about the various Hagim, about the various Mo'adim, the yearly and weekly holidays, right? Because it's an integral part of understanding the calendar, which of course is is a very important topic within Karaism. But here we come across it, just in context, which means out of context. And so I know this chapter, I would say, almost by heart, quite frankly. So, any rate, so we are in Leviticus 23, 1. וידבר יחווה אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל, ואמרת אליהם מועדי יחווה אשר תקראו אותם מקראי קודש, אלה הם מועדי. Okay, so these are my appointed times from the underlying root ya'ad, to appoint. Okay, so what's interesting, and what I always found interesting, is that one of the mo'eds, one of these mo'adim, one of these appointed times is the Shabbat, right? Because we usually think of the mo'adim as the yearly holidays, right? Of Hakham Melech, of the Passover offering, Hakham Melech, Shavuot, which is coming up pretty soon, etc. But within this list of the Mo'adim. First we have Shabbat. Okay, so verse 3, Sheshet Yamim, Te'aseh milacha ubiyom ha'shavi'i Shabbat Shabbatom mikra kodesh kol milacha lo te'asu Shabbat hi li'Yahweh b'chol moshvotechem. Okay, so that's a Shabbat. Sorry, I'm trying to highlight the verses as I read them. Okay, now we go into the yearly holidays. Well, actually, now it's interesting, right? Well, it's definitely Mikra Kodesh. Okay, Mikra Kodesh is usually translated as a holy convocation, a holy calling together, from the word nikro, or to call out, to call together. Okay, but what's interesting here is, okay, so it's definitely a holy convocation, but now here we have another Ele Mo'adei Yahweh Mikra Kodesh Asher Tikru'otam B'Mo'adam. So I take it back. Maybe Shabbat is not actually technically considered a mo'ed. It occurs in the chapter where it deals with the mo'adim, so it's related to the mo'adim because it falls regularly, falls once every 7 days. But actually, I take it back. It would seem to imply that Shabbat is separate, right? Because here we have Shabbat listed first, and then we have another introductory sentence, Ele mo'adei Yahweh mikrei kodesh asher tikru'otam b'mo'adam. Okay? These are the appointed times. Okay, so really these are the appointed times, these yearly holidays. And Shabbat is for contextual reasons, right? It's like Wikipedia, right? Things are related contextually. Things are related by their similarity in subject matter, right? That's why you click on a hyperlink, right? But actually, I guess it's not technically a mo'ed. It's actually listed outside the mo'adim, but it's listed along with the mo'adim. So I'm going to take that back and say that really the mo'ed, at least according to verse 4, the Mo'adim, the appointed times, really are referring to the yearly holidays. Okay. Ele Mo'adei Yahweh mikrei kodesh asher tikru'otam b'mo'adam. Verse 5. B'chodesh ha'rishon be'arba'a asar lechodesh mena arba'im. Pesach liYahweh. Verse 6. B'chamisha asar yom lechodesh hazeh hag amatzot liYahweh. Shiv'at yamim matzot to'chelu. ביום הראשון מקרא קודש יהיה לכם, כל מלאכת עבודה לא תעשו, ויקרבתם אישה ליהוה 7 ימים ביום השביעי מקרא קודש, כל מלאכת עבודה לא תעשו. That's Passover. Okay, verse 9. וידבר יהוה אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם כי דבו אל הארץ אשר אני נותן לכם וקצרתם את קצירה והבאתם את עומר ראשית קצירכם אל הכהן. So this is the Omer offering, verse 11. והניף את העומר לפני יהוה לרצונכם ממחרת השבת יניפו הכהן, verse 12. ועשיתם ביום הניפכם את העומר כבש תמים בין שנתו לעולה ליהוה, ומנחתו 2 עשרונים סולת בלולה בשמן, אישה ליהוה ריח ניחוח, ונסגו יין רביעית ההין. I just want to see something here. ויניף את העומר לפני יהוה לרצונכם למחרת השבת יניפו הכהן, עשיתם ביום הניפכם את העומר כבש תמים בין שנתו לעולה ליהוה, ומנחתו 2 עשרונים סולת בלולה בשמן, אישה ליהוה ריח ניחוח, ונסקו יין רביעית ההין. So this is going to actually answer a question for my friend Bruce, which I'll raise them. I'm just going to post him very quickly. Just 1 second here. So, and I'll explain what I'm talking about here. So my friend Bruce raised the question. He said he had always thought that the Omer offering is each individual brings an Omer offering, right? They bring the first fruits, which would be the barley, of their field. And I said, no, I'd always understood that it's a national offering, that the Omer offering is a single offering that's brought for the entire nation that basically kicks off, shall we say, the new agricultural season, right? And so I was looking for more evidence. Well, I wasn't, whenever someone raises a question, it always makes me think. I wasn't 100% sure. I'd always assumed it was a national offering, not an individual offering. But I started thinking about it, and I'm still thinking about it. But here, I think these verses 11 and 12, verses 12 and 13, kind of imply that it's a national offering. Because if you have to bring the first fruits, verse 12 says, "Wasitem biyom hanichem et omer keves tamim ben shnato," that you also have to bring, along with this Omer offering, that you have to bring a yearling sheep as a completely burnt, as a burnt offering, and you also have to bring a grain offering along with that. Okay, so that would imply that each person has to bring, not only if it's an individual offering, then each person doesn't just bring the first fruits of his barley harvest. He also has to bring a sheep and sacrifice the sheep, and he also has to do a grain offering with that. Okay, so that would imply to me that it's a national offering, right? Because I don't think, yes, we have the example of the Passover offering where each person does their own Passover offering, or actually households can split it if the sheep is too big, or if the household is too small, they can split it with another household. But it would seem to me that if we're now talking about not just bringing the first fruits, but also bringing a burnt offering, then this means it's a national offering, meaning it's done once for the entire nation by the Kohen, and it's not each individual brings an omer of barley along with a sheep for a burnt offering and a grain offering along with it. So let me just see if there's any other evidence here. הניף את העומר לפני יחווה לצמצם למחרת השבת יניפו הכהן, עשיתם ביום הניחם את העומר כבש תמים בין שנתו לעולה ליהווה. Also, I think the fact that it has to be done mimacharat Shabbat, right? If it were an individual offering, that means let's say each farmer comes when his barley harvest is ready and he brings the first fruits of his barley offering, then it would mean he would have to come, there would be like many subsequent Shabbats. Yeah, it just doesn't make sense, right? Because if there are many subsequent Shabbats, then, and I think this is another, I wish Bruce were here. So I think it's pretty, oh boy, where is it? See if we can talking right now, and you come into the room. Let's say maybe Bruce can come in and we can actually discuss this topic with him here. Let me just give him a second to see if he can come in. Because again, so let's say it's an individual offering. Well, we know the individual offering is brought on the day after the Shabbat, and that starts the count of the Omer, right? The 49 days of the count, and then the 50th day is Hag HaShavuot, as we'll see in just a second. That would mean that if it's an individual offering, that each person would be counting starting on their own, 49 days, and they would count it starting on their own day of the 49 days and the 50th day. So they would be celebrating, the entire nation would be celebrating Shavuot at different times, right? So let's say, there are 4 Sundays, because we're talking about the day after the Shabbat. Let's say there are 4 Sundays in a row where people are bringing their Omer offerings, right? That means there are going to be four different Sundays where Shavuot is celebrated 50 days later, right? And that doesn't seem to actually be 49. Well, yes, 50 days later, right? No, 49 days later, because actually the first day is counted as one. At any rate, so and that would make sense. Now we're gonna have, let's say 4 different Shavuots, But we also know that Shavuot is a holiday. It's one of the holidays that is a pilgrimage holiday where all of Israel has to come up. So for sure, it has to be on one day. So if we work backwards, that would imply that the Omer offering has to be a sure how. Okay, let me just post the link for Bruce. And hopefully comment. So that would imply that working backwards, that the Omer offering would have to be a national offering and not an individual offering. So let's give Bruce a second to come in here, and maybe we can roll this over with him. At any rate, I will read ahead in the meantime. So we are now in verse 14. Walechem, Qali, Karmel. One second. Yeah, I'm going to tell you guys something very interesting in just a second. Qali, Karmel, lo tochlu, ad etzem, hayom hazeh, ad haviyachem, et korban Elohechem, chukat olam, לדורותיכם bechol moshvotechem. So lechem, kali, with karmel. So what's lechem? Lechem is bread, obviously. Okay. Kali is comes from the word kala, okay, which means roasted. So roasted grains, they would take the barley grains, the wheat grains, and you could roast it. It's like almost like popcorn. I mean, it wouldn't pop, but it'd be like eating like seeds, right? Like munching on seeds. Karmel is usually just translated as just ripe grain or fresh grain. They usually translate it as, okay. So lo tochlu. So basically, you're not allowed to eat in any form these new grains. Okay, ad etzem hayom hazeh, ad heviechem et korban Elohechem chukat olam ledorotechem bechol moshvotechem. Okay, until you bring this omer offering, this wave sheaf offering, along with the burnt offering and the grain offering. Okay. So let's see if Bruce was able to make his way in. There he is. There we go. Hi, Bruce.
Hi.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
So we were just talking about your question. I'm gonna mute you because I'm getting a lot of feedback. Okay, so I muted you, Bruce. If you want to say something, then let me know. I think actually you can unmute yourself, but if you can't, just let me know and I'll unmute you because it's just getting feedback. You can hear me though? Bruce, you can hear me? Oh, shit. Oops, sorry. I just banned him. I just threw him out and banned him. Oh, boy. How do I unban him? Oh, boy. What did I do? That was a mistake. Oh, gosh. Okay, hold on a second here. Oh, shoot. I just threw him out by mistake. I pressed the wrong button. I threw him out and I banned him from the room. So, poor Bruce. Hold on a second here. How do I do this now? How do I unban him? Oh, God. Just give me 1 second here. And private chat. Oh, geez. I think I have to go back into StreamYard. Oh, boy. 1 second, please. Band, destinations, team settings, my account, billing. No, that's not it. Log out. Oh God, how did I do this? Oh, there he is. Hi, Bruce. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Sorry about that. I threw you out of the room and banned you by mistake. So I'm glad you were able to get back in.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to mute you. The feedback. Okay? And if you want to say something, just let me know. Or I think you can unmute your microphone. So the question that you had is about is the Omer offering an individual offering or is it a national offering? Okay. And I think now we have some clear evidence, if you ask me. And then as I was saying this evidence out loud, then I came across even clearer evidence. But I think we have some clear evidence here that it's a national offering and not an individual offering. And that would be in verses, where is it? Right, verses 12 and 13 to start with. So we're in Leviticus 23:12. So when you, on the day that you wave the Omer, that you bring the Omer offering, so you also have to do a keves tamim ben shnato le'olah Yahweh, right? You also have to bring a yearling or year-old, or up to a year-old, I think some interpreters say. At any rate, a yearling, unblemished lamb as a burnt offering. So that would mean that if each person is bringing an individual offering, then when they would also, or an individual Omer offering, right, a sheaf of barley, they would also have to sacrifice a sheep. So each person would not just have to sacrifice, or would have to bring wave the Omer offering. They would also have to bring a sheep and sacrifice a sheep. So it almost becomes like a second, like another Passover offering in a sense. Each person has to sacrifice an entire sheep. In addition to that, you of course have the grain offering. Okay, so I think this is one proof that it's a national offering and not an individual offering, because again, for each person to come bring their own sheep and sacrifice it, we're talking again about hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of sheep that would be sacrificed on the day that they brought the Omer offering. So I think that's a bit of proof against it, or for it being a national offering rather than an individual offering. But I think here we have kind of the slam dunk proof, if you ask me, and that's if we go on. Okay. ולחם וקלי וכרמל לא תאכלו עד עצם היום הזה, עד אביכם את קורבן אלוהיכם. So not this verse, but bread and roasted grains and ripe grains, or raw grains, how they translate here, fresh grain. לא תאכלו עד עצם היום הזה. You're not allowed to eat until this very day, until you bring the קורבן אלוהיכם, until you bring the sacrifice to your God. חוקת עולם לדורותיכם בכל מושבותיכם. This is an eternal statute throughout all your generations, for all of your habitations. And then we go on, right, in verse 15, and you shall count for yourselves from the day after the Shabbat, from the day of your bringing the wave sheaf offering, right, the Omer wave offering, Sheva Shabbatot Mimot Tiana, there shall be 7 complete Shabbats, 7 complete weeks, right? So you all, I don't have to go over it. We will go over it word for word in a second, but just to take a break, you all know the deal, right? You know the thing, man. That once the Omer offering is brought, then we count 49 days, and the 50th day is Shavuot. We also know that, at least according to the Karaites, that the Omer offering has to be brought on a Sunday, the day after the Shabbat. So if everyone's bringing in their own Omer offering, this means that there's going to be a bunch of different Shabbats a bunch of different Sundays where people are bringing their Omer offering, okay, right? Because not everyone's field is going to be ripe at the same time. Some will bring it earlier, some will bring it later. So let's say it spans over 4 or 5 or 6 different Sundays, right? So now each person is going to start their 49-day count on a different day, which means that you're going to end up having 4 or 5 or 6 different Shavuots, right? Because everyone's going to end their 49-day Omer count on a different day. So you're going to end up having 4 or 5 or 6 Shavuots, depending on when which Sunday each individual farmer brought the Omer offering, depending on when their grain was ripe and ready to bring the first fruits. And so now we have not a single national Shavuot. We have 4 or 5 or 6 different Shavuots, but we know that Shavuot is a pilgrimage festival, that all of the Kol Zechurcha, all of the males of Israel, are supposed to come up to the place that God chooses on Shavuot, right? On Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot are the 3 pilgrimage holidays, right? So this would mean that this wouldn't make sense, because Shavuot would have to be one day, right? We can't all be celebrating Shavuot on 5 or 6 different Shabbatot. So if we work our way backwards, that would imply that the Omer offering has to be brought on a single day, which would imply that it's a national holiday rather than an individual or a national offering rather than individual offering, because because that would be if it were an individual offering, it would not all be brought on the same day. So that I think is, in my eyes at least, pretty clear proof. So Bruce, what do you have to say? I'm going to unmute your mic, and I'm going to mute my mic. Actually, I don't think muting my mic. Yeah, it will. Okay, it will.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All along, when it earlier on in Leviticus, it talks about the Kohanim, what they're supposed to do, what they're supposed to wear, and specifically talking to the Kohanim. Here, it's not specifically talking to the Kohanim. Not only that, it's talking in the plural. If it were the Kohanim that would be making the sacrifice, why wouldn't it say, and the Kohen would make the sacrifice? It would be so clear if that were the case, that it was just the Kohen to make a national sacrifice, that it would say, and the Kohen would take the lamb and the Omer offering and make a national sacrifice. But it doesn't say that. It says you, plural, you, plural, you, plural, you, plural, again and again.
Okay, so my response to that, first of all, would be that the Kohanim are always the ones to do the offering, right? We as Israelites, we bring the offering, okay, and I'm trying to remember now to the beginning of Leviticus. I think in certain cases we may be able to slaughter the offering, but it's always the Kohen who takes it at that point and throws it on the altar. So there's never a case, no matter what, even if you're right that each person individually brings an offering, still it's always the Kohen that's going to be processing the offering. We're not allowed to take sacrifices and throw them onto the altar and sprinkle the blood and all of this kind of stuff. We can slaughter the sacrifice, but then the Kohen takes over. Okay, that would be point number one. I think point number two would be that a lot of times, when it speaks about an individual offering, and I'm trying to think, like, let's say when someone has tzara'at, when someone has quote unquote leprosy, or they often translate as scale disease, whatever it is, right? Tzara'at, that at the end he is supposed to bring a sacrifice, okay? But again, that sacrifice, even though it says you bring the sacrifice is ultimately given to the Kohen to execute, right? The Kohanim are the ones that execute the sacrifices, okay? In terms of it being plural rather than individual, okay, so the first point is, okay, so just to be very clear, your claim is it doesn't say that the Kohanim are the ones who are doing the sacrifice. And my response to that is that it never really says that, okay? When Israel brings the sacrifice, it says you bring the sacrifice, but it really means that you bring the sacrifice, maybe kill it, but then the Kohanim take over. The Kohanim are the only ones ever to handle the sacrifices. That's their job, okay? That's the first point. Okay, the second point is it being in the plural. Well, the Torah is notoriously famous for not being consistent with singular and plural. Sometimes in individual sentences, it can switch between the singular and the plural. We've seen that many times. I can't think of an example offhand, but we've seen that many times. And just because it's using the plural, it doesn't imply that, it doesn't necessarily mean that each individual that has to carry it out. It could be that the Kohanim are carrying it out for the entire nation, and that's why it's in the plural. But aside from those 2 points, let me again stick to what I think my main point is that if we have different dates, if each person is bringing an individual Omer offering, that means that each person is going to be starting the count on a different day. Yes, it's restricted to, at least according to us Karaites, it's restricted to a Sunday because it's Mimacharat Shabbat. It's a day after the Shabbat, but let's say it stretches over 4 or 5 or 6 Shabbatot, right? I'm sorry, Sundays, each person is bringing their Omer offering when their field is, has enough barley to yield first fruits. Okay, so then that implies that we're going to have 4 or 5 or 6 Shavuot, and that doesn't make logical sense. So, Bruce, what's your response specifically to that point?
I don't know. I think what we have to do is look at all the other sacrifices that are detailed and see how they're worded, and then compare this to all the other ones, how they're worded.
Okay.
Look,
well,
I don't have a position. I don't have a position. I'm not saying that what I'm thinking is my position. I'm asking a question because I don't. It's almost the middle of the month, and so I'm wondering if I should do a seder.
Okay, but that's another question. Yeah, I know that you don't have a specific position. You're just questioning it, but that my response would be that this is the fact that Shavuot has to fall out on one day. If we work our way backwards, that would imply that the Omer offering has to fall out in one day, and therefore it would imply that it's a national offering rather than an individual offering. Because if it were an individual offering, it wouldn't fall out on one day because people's barley fields wouldn't be ripe on the same day. So that would be my response. So I'm not questioning you as if you're on trial or something like that. I'm trying to have it since you had raised the question and got me thinking about it myself, right? Because I'd always assumed that it was Ariella. I'd always assumed that it was a national offering, not an individual offering. But you made me think. So now coming back to you again, circling back, is what's her face, Biden's assistant likes to say, right? That's my response would be that no, I don't. I think there's clear evidence that it could not be an individual sacrifice. It would have to be a national sacrifice. And I don't know if I'll let Bruce respond, and then Ariella, maybe you want to say something. So go ahead, Bruce.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yep, I hear you. I'm just muting my mic.
Okay. I was going to say the solution to the problem is to build a time machine and go back and see how things were done, because any of the national sacrifices for Passover or for Sukkot, I mean, there were thousands and thousands of people making the pilgrimage, and the sacrifices were all given on the Chag on the same day. So how was it done?
I mean, that's a different question. But if we just focus on the question at hand, I don't think it's viable to. Yeah, go ahead,
it's
Bruce.
the same question, Melech. It's the same question. Because if thousands and thousands of people brought sacrifices on the different pilgrimage festivals, it didn't spread out over days and days, and nobody knew when the Chag was. The Chag was very specific, and it was on one day, and everybody brought sacrifices. And so why would this be different? This would be the same.
The reason it would be different is because. Yeah, go ahead, Ariella.
I would say maybe there's a combination of things here. Clearly you can't judge the barley harvest in the north of Israel with the south of Israel, and so therefore there'd have to be one field that was chosen in Jerusalem, wherever, to be able to specify that the barley omer was ready. So it'd be like a communal. It seems to me the communal waving of the omer. But at the same time, I mean, was there an individual participation? Is this when it uses the plural? Is it using the plural or the royal we saying that everybody is counted in the one offering of this Omer, waving of the Omer. I don't know. There's just a lot of questions with this. I mean, it would seem impossible to bring hundreds of thousands of sacrifices to the temple in Jerusalem. I mean, was there a way you did it in your own home? I don't think that that was even permitted, was it?
Okay, so to respond, so Bruce is saying, well, if you can't bring hundreds of thousands of sacrifices to Jerusalem in one day, then how did we do the Passover sacrifice, which was brought individually, and that was, again, hundreds of thousands of sacrifices brought in one day? I know that's going to be Bruce's response, right? So I'm preempting it. So I don't think the problem is the bringing of the sacrifice, hundreds of thousands of sacrifices in one day. I think that could all somehow be processed. It'd be a longer line even than at the Bank Leumi on a Friday morning, but it would all work out in the end one way or another. So, I think the main point here is that if we have different dates for the Omer offering, then we're going to have different dates for Shavuot, and that is not possible.
Is the checking for the Aviv barley, Devora and what's his name, Drummond, found almost Aviv barley at some plot east of Beit Shemesh in the Jordan River Valley. They found a plot where there was barley that was almost Aviv, and so they declared you can begin the new year. And what I'm saying is that seems very arbitrary, because nowhere else in the rest of the country was there anything close to Aviv. Even now, at the end of a month, after the rabbinic Passover, half of the barley wasn't Aviv. Even then, even like a week ago. So I don't know. It just seems arbitrary to me.
But Bruce, that's a different issue, right? I mean, that may be the case, but that's a different issue. So the first question is, let's just stick to the question here. The question here is there one day to bring the Omer off? Is it a national sacrifice, or is it an individual sacrifice, right? Let's just stick to the question. So I think Ariella probably wants to say something, so let me unmute Ariella. Oops.
I would
Ariella.
say that it's a national. I would say it's a national sacrifice, because you can't have them doing it, every farmer doing it on a different day. It has to end up with the entire congregation ending up at Shavuot.
That's exactly what I think too. And what about people who are not farmers, who don't have barley fields? What about artisans in cities, or shepherds, or right? They don't have barley fields, right? So what do they do? When do they bring the Omer offering? You know?
I don't know. It still seems a little strange to me that one farmer way up in one particular place in the entire country where the barley is almost Aviv determines that this is the new year. I don't know. It just seems.
Okay, sorry. I think I muted you earlier there. I thought you were done. I agree with you 100%, but that's a different issue. Let's put that as the next question on the agenda. But to stick to the issue is the Omer offering a national sacrifice? In other words, is one sacrifice brought for everybody, which I think is the case? Or is it an individual sacrifice where each person comes up and brings the sacrifice whenever, their barley field is ready? That's the question at hand, okay? So
we've spoken about that enough. Now my question is, does one field in the Jordan River Valley, somewhere in the Jordan River Valley, where the barley is almost Aviv, then you declare a new year. Seems peculiar to me.
Okay, so before we close discussion on the first question, let's see if Ariella wants to say something about that.
On the first question or the second one?
Whatever you want to say. We're ready to go on to the second question. Let's do it.
Okay. I would say that because everything had to be determined around the area of Jerusalem, that the determination of the barley had to be done in Jerusalem, just like the new moon has to be seen from Jerusalem. So I would say that you're not going to take a farmer from the north of Israel, which is cooler and different climatic details. So, I mean, obviously the temple's in Jerusalem, so there had to be some barley seen there. And I would go with the idea that it is a national sacrifice, because otherwise you've got everybody doing their own thing all the time.
Right. So I agree with you, obviously, on the first question. So just again, we'll close discussion for now on the first question. I think the consensus, at least, is that it's a single offering brought for the entire nation, not that each individual farmer brings it. But if anyone wants to go back and talk about that issue again, we can. So going on to the second issue, I'll relate a story. I remember one year, it must have been around 2005, I'm guessing, or something like that. I went with a certain Karaite who shall remain unnamed, and the moon, it's the same idea as the Aviv, but you'll see the relevance in a second. The moon was able to be spotted, okay, but it was such a marginal sighting, okay, that the determination was made that the only way we could spot it would be to go all the way down to near Eilat, up into the mountains north of Eilat, right near the Egyptian border, where the mountains are tall, okay, and where the humidity is very low, and maybe, if we're lucky, we'll be able to see it for just like a second or two. So I took a trip with this Karaite. We went all the way down to Eilat. It was a wonderful trip. That's besides the point. We went snorkeling and went to. It was a beautiful trip, but that's not we were right on the Egyptian border, and it was a beautiful trip. But that's not the point. So we went up to the top of this mountain north of Eilat, right on the Egyptian border. When I say right on the Egyptian border, I mean we were waving to the Egyptian soldiers right over the fence. That's how close we were, you know, and they were very friendly, by the way. But that's besides the point. So finally, the sun set, and we're able to just make out a glimmer of the moon. Okay, and there were, I think, 3 or 4 of us. I don't remember. And based on this sighting, we declared the new moon for that day. Okay, nowhere of all the new moon observers anywhere in Israel, no one else was able to see the new moon anywhere throughout the land of Israel. So then the question is, it's similar to what you and Bruce are raising regarding the Aviv. If a couple of people up on a mountain in the middle of nowhere see the moon for a couple of seconds, and nobody else anywhere in Israel sees the moon, is that really New Moon Day? I mean, does that count as New Moon Day when only a couple of people were able to see it? You know, it's a similar question. I'll mute myself.
I can't hear anything. Are you speaking?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I muted myself. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a
Bruce,
very
you
good
wanna say-
question. And the question would go back to what I said before, is Jerusalem the area, since the temple is there, where things are determined, where the Kohanim are, where the declaration would be made for the month.
Right.
It seems to me that there had to be some kind of consensus. There had to be some kind of
Right.
general point. Is if it is seen from this point, then that's the start of the new moon. The same way with these national sacrifices.
Right. Yeah, and this is actually something that Bruce and I have been discussing now for a while, which is, should we? Well, you know, we set up our own group now, I'm calling it the Biblical Calendar Society, right? And we want to start putting out new moon reports and Aviv reports and all this kind of stuff. And so Bruce and I have been discussing, should we make some kind of, arbitrary, it has to be arbitrary because we can't pick it out of the Torah, ring around Jerusalem within which the new moon has to be seen and within which the Aviv barley has to be found, right, to prevent this from happening. So let's, I don't know, a 25-kilometer ring around the Temple Mount. You have to see the new moon within a 25-kilometer ring, and you have to find the Aviv barley within that 25-kilometer ring for it to count. Because otherwise you go, like you said, there's so much variation. You go all the way down to the south and in the Negev somewhere. You may have Aviv barley already in January, for God's sakes, in some cases. Does that now mean we're going to be celebrating Passover in January? It's rare, but it could happen. If it's an unusually dry and warm winter.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know the answer. Then on the other hand, for instance, well, I'm trying to think now. I don't know. I was going to say something, but I forgot what I was going to say. But yeah, it's very possible that things have to be centered around Jerusalem, for that very reason. It prevents the arbitrariness, right? It cuts down the time variation. Some people finding it very early and other people finding it very late. And it definitely centers things on Jerusalem. The only problem, though, with the Aviv, perhaps, is that, I guess one problem with the Aviv is it's going to push everything back because the barley in Jerusalem ripens a lot later because it's up in the hills, So it's possible that Passover would fall out in April, maybe even May, which would then push Sukkot to October, maybe even November. I don't know. It's not an easy thing. And then the new moon. Let's say nobody in Jerusalem sees the new moon because it's cloudy in Jerusalem, but let's say it's clear skies in Tel Aviv or clear skies in Beersheba, and everybody looks up and sees the new moon. Do we now say it's not New Moon Day because nobody saw it in Jerusalem? I mean, there are a lot of questions that I don't necessarily have the answers to.
Yeah, that makes it complicated, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely makes it complicated, right?
So also,
and what are the boundaries of the land of Israel? What's that?
Well, it also, typically Jews in the diaspora have counted the Omer. They've and I don't know what they do about waiving the Omer. And I think that is just mute. It belongs in Israel because it says in verse 10 that when you come into the land, it's like it has to be done from Israel. But unless we're following what's happening in Israel, it's mute. It's like, what are we doing all this stuff in other countries for?
Well, they count the Omer, but they turn it into like a count. Like each day is another step in your self-improvement, and each day is they even give Kabbalistic interpretation. This is they're the I can't remember what they do, but the 10 Sfirot, and they cross-reference it. Today is Hod Shebehadar or something like that. It's
exactly
this Sfirah crossed with this Sfirah, and all. They give it all kinds of basically they see it because they repurposed Shavuot to no longer be the day of the bringing of the first fruits of the wheat harvest, which is what it is in the Torah. There's nothing whatsoever to do with the giving of the Torah in the Torah. It's a first fruits holiday for the wheat harvest, right? But now with the rabbis, at the hand of the rabbis, okay, and you can argue, did they need to do this? Did they not? That's another story, okay? But in the hand of the rabbis, one way or another, Shavuot is no longer the Shavuot of the Tanakh, which is a first fruits holiday. It's now a holiday celebrating the giving of the Torah. Okay, so
exactly
with the so now the Omer offering also loses its meaning of counting between the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and takes on the meaning of leading up to the giving of the Torah. Right,
exactly.
And then add on top of it the Lag BaOmer. Right, the 33rd day of the Omer count.
Exactly.
Second, right, which is now related to Rabbi Akiva's students not dying on that day. So now that's where it comes from. So it's Talmudic, right? So now that's really in modern Rabbinical Judaism, that's what the Omer means. It means basically counting up to the giving of the Torah. Right, you're counting up from the freedom of from when we left Egypt to when the Torah was given, and we're celebrating throughout. In the middle of that, we're celebrating Rabbi Akiva's students not dying on a single day. That's which of course has absolutely nothing to do with what Shavuot is in the Torah. So it's already divorced from its original meaning anyway, you know?
Yeah, we were in Israel last year. Obviously, when that terrible accident happened with the things caving in on Lag Bomer and all this people dying and getting hurt, and I just had this terrible, ominous feeling before it happened that we felt that this was all idolatry going over to this grave, and in making exceptions for Kohanim so they could go a certain distance close to the grave. All of this stuff was just so pagan. To me, it was like something really bad's going to happen, and then something did. And then, of course, the police were blamed for it. So it's like, whatever. We could see from Spot, we could actually see the lights from over there.
Oh,
it was incredible.
Sure. Yeah, it's one of the biggest gatherings in Israel every year, or should I say, was one of the biggest gatherings in Israel every year.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on this year. But Bruce, do you want to say something?
No, I'm sorry. I had a phone call came in, and I was with you on my phone, so I lost you. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. All right. Anything else we want? So Bruce, we were discussing the new moon. Okay, so let's say we were to. So Bruce, as I mentioned to Ariel, Bruce, you and I were discussing this idea that maybe the Viv has to be found only around Jerusalem, okay? Or maybe the new moon has to be found only around Jerusalem. But then I was saying to Ariella, let's say you have a situation where nobody in the Jerusalem area sees the new moon because it's cloudy that day, but down in Beersheba, it's completely clear and the entire city sees the new moon. So what do we do in a case like that?
I think the rabbis dealt with this problem, and they said that witnesses could and are obligated even to travel on the Sabbath to get to Jerusalem to give their testimony. And so the moon needs to be sighted within a day's travel by foot or by mule or by Pony Express to Jerusalem. It can't be a lot where you are with Nehemiah. It can't be.
Okay, that's perhaps true, but that's not the question. Again, the question was, we were talking about restricting the finding of the Aviv to, let's say, I remember you and I spoke about just an arbitrary, like 25-kilometer ring around the Temple Mount, okay, for the Aviv and for the sighting of the new moon, okay? But let's say a lot. Let's say that in Jerusalem, nobody can see the new moon because it's cloudy, but in Eilat, where it doesn't get cloudy nearly as much, the new moon is visible to everybody that entire day. Does that count as new moon day, or does that not count as new moon day, in your opinion, Bruce?
Well, as I said, the rabbis dealt with this problem. They had the same question back when the Talmud was written, and they said that witnesses can't be more than a day's travel, a day's walk, or a day's ride by animal into Jerusalem.
So are you suggesting that's because that's the way the rabbis solve the problem, that's the way we solve the problem?
No, well, I'm not discounting the rabbis out of hand because they're rabbis.
That is the solution to the problem. What's that?
I'm not discounting the rabbis' solution out of hand because they happen to be rabbis. You know, there were Jews that were dealing with the same question that we're dealing with.
Absolutely. But does that mean that we have to accept their conclusion just because that's the conclusion they came up with?
So look, today you have telephone and telegraph. So what if you sight the new moon in South Africa and someone picks up the phone and calls Jerusalem? I mean, you have to make some kind of convention.
Okay, but we are now, right? We have now set up our Biblical Calendar Society, right? Which you are an integral part of, whether you like it or not. And so now we're trying to come up with rules, right? So what is our rule? What's the middle point? What borders do we accept?
my thing would be it would have to be limited to the land of Israel because that's the only holy land. I mean, clearly, I would say it'd be closer to Jerusalem, maybe within a walking distance of Jerusalem. If the question would arise, if it is cloudy, did Yahweh have something to do with the fact that the moon wasn't seen that from Jerusalem? Is it possible we need to wait until we see it from Jerusalem? These are all just questions that come to mind.
Sure, without a doubt. But
no,
then another question is, so Ariella, you said that within the boundaries of the land of Israel. How do we define the boundaries of the land of Israel, right? The state of Israel is not the same as the boundaries of the land of Israel, right? And even in ancient times, the land of Israel expanded and contracted depending on who was king, right? And for instance, Eilat was never, as an example, Eilat was never part of the land of Israel. Eilat is actually mentioned in the Tanakh, but it's a place where Solomon sent his ships with, who was it? Hiram, I think. With another king, he had a base there, but it was owned by another king. So then we have how do we even define the borders of the land of Israel? Do we go by the current borders of Israel?
That's a very good point. I would say that. Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, I would say that we can be in total agreement that a day's walk is something that was constant then and constant today. A day's walk. Because if you start talking about other means of transportation, then, the whole question of is it by train or by bus or by car? And if it's car, is it diesel or gas or turbo or this or that? So a day's walk sounds consistent and consistent with ancient times. And it also brings to mind this Messiah. Now, Ariella doesn't know who Messiah is, but I think that Melech may have heard of her, or may have even met her.
Yeah, we met her. Yeah,
you met her. Okay, so she also said in the environs of Jerusalem. So what's the environs of Jerusalem? I would go with Ariella, a day's walk.
Okay, but then basically, okay, that's nice and something to think about. The only thing we don't have to have this entire debate now, but the only thing that I don't like about that is we're imitating the rabbis. And I would just, to make ourselves distinct from the rabbis, even if that's a good solution. I'm not saying it's not a good solution, but don't you think we should distinguish ourselves from the rabbis? Otherwise, it just looks like we're copying them. Or more than that, it looks like we're giving a credence to their movement. I
agree with that too. And it's good to come up with our own stuff. What if we went with what was done historically? I don't know if we have anything that gives us evidence of what was done historically that wasn't based on the rabbis. I mean, is there anything in Tanakh that shows that they did it on a certain day? Based on something that we're discussing here.
Yeah, I don't know. Not that I could think of offhand.
I can.
Yeah, go for it.
I live near Tekoa. Tekoa is like my home. And you know the root of the word Tekoa. It's like tekiah, to blow a shofar. To blow a shofar. It also means to be stuck, which is, a common joke we have, to be takua in Tekoa.
Okay.
But it's very easy to cite new moons from Tekoa because it's on the east side of the mountain ridge. And so during the winter, whenever the mountains or anything west of the mountains are fogged in, east of the mountains, there's no fog. And so you can easily cite the new moon. And it was a good place to cite new moons. And then there was no telegraph back in those days, but there was a shofar. And so Tekoa got the name, I think, from sounding the shofar to deliver the message that the new moon was sighted.
So you're saying within the shofar's blast of the Temple Mount is where you're going with this?
Well, there has to be a whole series of signal fires or shofar blasts
Well, the signal fires again. That comes from the rabbis. That's in the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah.
Well, why discount it? Why?
I'm not discounting them. I'm not. All I'm saying is that they came up with a solution which was a workable, viable solution for them. But that it's not canonical. They're not taking that out of the text of the Torah. They're just dealing with the problem in a way that we're trying to deal with the problem. That's number one.
Right.
And number two, I think we should deliberately do something different from the rabbis to distinguish ourselves from the rabbis. Since there is no answer directly in the Torah, we might as well do something different from the rabbis. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Their solution is good.
Okay.
You
so forget about Melech. So forget about
Yeah.
shofars and forget about signal fires. Let's have smoke signals.
There you go.
Anyway, we don't have to get to the bottom of this now. I think there it's a lot of questions that we have to, as the Biblical Calendar Society, we do at some point have to come up with at least some kind of working answer, all right? Where we say whatever it is, a day's walk within Jerusalem. We say other. We state what the problem is. That you can't just go out in the middle of the Negev and find like half a field somewhere with a little bit of aviv barley. So it has to be within a day's walk of Jerusalem, or half a day's walk of Jerusalem, or 25 kilometers, or whatever the case may be. The point is we have to come up with some kind of working solution, because it's not clear from the Torah. It's not clear from the Torah. That's for sure. From the written Torah.
So basically, historically, they didn't have the ability to communicate by internet. I mean, obviously, we can make a solution based on what we can do with things today, which would not be rabbinic at all. I mean, but as far as I'm concerned, it should be somewhere in the maybe like a day's journey from Jerusalem, because Jerusalem. I don't know. I'm just saying it's the place. It is held up so many times in Tanakh that Jerusalem was where the name was actually defined. I mean, the whole focus of holiness was Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, and therefore it should be either seen from there or communicated to there from somewhere within the environs. I mean, Masada is not even half a day's journey from there. Could he see it from Masada? And was that part of Israel at that time? I don't know. It seems to me like communication through the internet is possible practical solution. What do you guys think?
For sure, but the internet you can communicate it from the internet instantaneously, right? So again, that doesn't solve the problem, right? I mean, I could see the new moon in South Africa and communicate it from there. I mean, so what are the boundaries that we set? Anyway, I don't think we have to decide this now. I'm just saying we have to come up with some kind of rules that make sense and that I think are appealing, or that are kind of in line with our mission, which is to stick close to the text of the Torah as much as possible. I think we should I think we've raised the issue and discussed some of the solutions. I think we should move on, but whatever the answer is, it should somehow certainly glorify God and glorify the Torah, and be something that's logical and reasonable and makes sense, but at the same time distinguishes ourselves from the rabbis, if for no other reason than to show that we're not them and they're not us.
Melech, I see there's a comment over there by this Wolfgang. The sound of the shofar is a very. I thought that was interesting anyway. Yeah,
I saw it too. I was about to read it, and I like it. So who knows? Maybe that's the solution we should go for. A shofar's blast from the Temple Mount. But then, how far is the shofar's blast?
Depends who's.
Could it be actually repeated several times? I mean, a shofar from this mountain to the next mountain, and then the next mountain over. I mean, can it be like 3 mountains away? I mean, that's all.
Now it's getting like the signal fires with the signal fires with the rabbis. That's what they did with the signal.
There
fires.
You go.
I don't know. Yeah, we don't have an answer now, but we definitely should continue thinking about it and talking about it and coming up with some kind of solution, because there definitely is a problem here with the current system, which is, as Bruce said, you can go down, and as Ariella said, you can go down and find some field, let's say for Aviv, in the middle of nowhere that happens to be Aviv barley, and all of a sudden now it's Aviv, right? Or the example I gave, you can go up to some mountain outside of Eilat in the middle of nowhere, and nobody else throughout the entire country can see the new moon, but you can see it for 5 minutes, and now is it new moon day? I don't know. It just there has to be some kind of happy medium, I guess, but we'll figure it all out.
I would ask, what does Ben think?
My husband's not here right now. He's didn't get any sleep last night, so he's taking the day off.
But it'd be interesting to ask him what his opinion.
I will ask him. I'll ask him, and then we'll post to you on the Karaite site. Okay, that would be good. I'm sure he'd have some ideas too about this.
Yeah.
And I'd love to find Melech. I would love to locate Mishaya. She should be a part of this conversation.
Then let's do it. We should set up a meeting of our first meeting of the Biblical Calendar Society, and get as many people in who have something to say about it. And
good idea.
Let's do that. Plan for that in the next week or two. We'll invite
that sounds good.
Bruce, Mishaya, whoever else we think is an integral part of starting to make these decisions. Okay, sounds like a plan.
Let us know when is a good time. I mean, once you get something. Personally, we have just rented a greenhouse for raising crops during this difficult time that possibly is coming on the earth. But also as a commercial thing, it's 1,000 square meters. It's huge, and we got it real reasonably. And so we're starting out this week seriously in this work. But if you set a time, we can take the time to get together with you.
Oh wow! So you guys are going to raise and sell crops?
Yeah. It's already set up. It's been used before commercially, and there's several neighbors that are going to help us get it together. So
cool.
Clearly it's a great idea. We're going to try to and possibly raise our own chickens and eggs, and things could go. The fire could hit the fan fairly soon in the world, and if we have a way to sustain ourselves and several other families, then besides sell things to people that can't get it. I mean, we just last week had a road blockage where nobody could get into the area. They couldn't bring food in. It wasn't a political thing. It was that there was so much rain that the roads washed out. So, it just gave us kind of a taste of what might happen. So that's just an update.
Is there actually a functioning, working government in Colombia? I mean, do you feel like you're in a country that's actually a country, or it's just wild gang wars? I mean, I know it's stereotyped.
People are used to protecting each other here. We live in probably the safest part of this province. They've told us that. It's the last place they'd ever come looking. But there are gangs. You probably heard last week there was a club golf. It's called the Club of the Gulf, that they put out a warning that they had threatened to take this government over, and they're a band of criminals and drug addicts. And but it calmed down. I don't know what the government did about it, but it's gone now. So, but we do have communication with some people that know what's going on, so that helps.
Okay. Interesting. Well, all right. So I think we'll move on now in the Torah portion. I'll continue reading so we can get to the end of it, and maybe we'll stop and discuss one or two more things. But it's getting kind of late here, and I know it's late with Bruce's, so I'll continue reading in the portion now. Sound like a plan? All right. So let's see. We were in, and if anybody wants to read, please let me know. Okay. So we're in Leviticus 23:15, I think, right up to the Omer offering, Bruce. So, okay. So we'll start in verse 15. Sfartem lachem mi maharat ha-Shabbat miyom haviachem et Omer ha-Tnufa sheva Shabbatot tnimot tiena ad mi maharat ha-Shabbat ha-Shvi'it tisberu 50 yom v'hikravtem minha ha-dasha liYahweh. Verse 17. Mimoshvotechem taviu lehem tnufa 2 esronim solet tiena Hametz te'afena bikurim leYahweh. Okay, so we're in verse 18. והקרבתם על הלחם 7 כבשים תמימים בני שנה ופר בן בקר אחד ואלים 2 יהיו עולה ליהוה ומנחתם ונזקיהם אישי ריח ניחוח ליהוה. Verse 19. ועשיתם שעיר עזים אחד לחטאת ושני כבשים בני שנה לזבח שלמים. Verse 20. והניף הכהן אותם על לחם הביקורים תנופה לפני יהוה על 2 כבשים חודש יהיו ליהוה לכהן וקראתם בעצם היום הזה מקרא קודש יהיה לכם כל מלאכת עבודה לא תעשו חוקת עולם בכל מושבותיכם לדורותיכם. Just one thing here, I just want to see something. Okay, verse 22. ובקצורכם את קציר עצכם לא תכלה ועד שדך בקצורך ולקט קצירך לא תרקט לעני ולגר תעזוב אותם אני יהוה אלוהיכם. So this is interesting, right in the middle of this we have this law for payah, leaving the corners of the field and the gleanings, right, and not to pick up the gleanings. And we actually saw this, I think it was in Leviticus. We just saw this recently, also in one of the recent chapters. So this is has nothing to do with the Moadim at all, but it's stuck in here. Obviously, now we're getting up to the harvest season, right? So this is now between the Shavuot, which is the wheat harvest, and already now this is the 7th month with Yom Teruah. So between that, already the harvest of the fields would have started, like the earlier fruits, like the grapes. Maybe that's why it's mentioned. At any rate, verse 23. וידבר יהוה אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל לאמור, בחודש השביעי, באחד לחודש יהיה לכם שבתון, זיכרון תרועה, מקרא קודש. 25. כל מלאכת עבודה לא תעשו. Anyone want to, anyone have a comment? Or if anyone has a comment, just type in and let me know that you want to speak, because I'm looking at the text here, so I might not be able to always see it. Okay, verse 26. וידבר יהוה אל משה לאמור, אך בעשור לחודש השביעי הזה יום הכיפורים הוא מקרא קודש יהיה לכם ופיניתם את נפשותיכם והקרבתם אישה ליהוה. Verse 28. בכל מלאכה לא תעשו בעצם היום הזה, כי כל הנפש אשר לא תעונה בעצם היום הזה ונכרתה מעמך. Verse 30. Just one second. וכל הנפש אשר תעשה כל מלאכה בעצם היום הזה ועבדתי את הנפש ההיא מקרב עמה, כל מלאכה לא תעשו חוקת עולם לדורותיכם בכל מושבתיכם, שבתון הוא לכם ועיניתם את נפשותיכם בתשעה לחודש בערב מערב עד ערב תשבתו שבתכם. Verse 33. וידבר יהוה אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל לאמור, ב15 יום לחודש השביעי הזה חג הסוכות 7 ימים ליהוה, ביום הראשון מקרא קודש כל מלאכת עבודה לא תעשו, 7 ימים תקריבו אישה ליהוה, ביום השביעי מקרא קודש יהיה לכם והקרבתם אישה ליהוה, עצרת היא כל מלאכת עבודה לא תעשו. 37. אלא מועדי יהוה אשר תקראו אותם מקראי קודש להקריב אישה ליהוה עולה ומנחה זבח ונסכים דבר יום ביומו, מלבד שבתות יהוה ומלבד מתנותיכם ומלבד כל נדריכם מלבד כל נדיבותיכם אשר תיתנו ליהוה. Verse 39. אך ב15 יום לחודש השביעי באספכם את תבואת הארץ, תחוגו את חג יהוה 7 ימים, ביום הראשון שבתון וביום השמיני שבתון. לקחתם לכם ביום הראשון פרי עץ הדר, כפות תמרים וענף עץ אבות וערבי נחל, ושמחתם לפני יהוה אלוהיכם 7 ימים. וחגותם אותו חג ליהוה 7 ימים בשנה, חוקת עולם לדורותיכם בחודש השביעי תחוגו אותו. Verse 42. בסוכות תשבו 7 ימים, כל האזרח בישראל ישבו בסוכות, למען ידעו דורותיכם כי בסוכות הושבתי את בני ישראל בהוציאי אותם מארץ מצרים, אני יהוה אלוהיכם. Verse 44. ידבר משה את מועדי יהוה את אל בני ישראל. Now we have chapter 24, and we are going, that's the last chapter for this parsha, right? 24, 23 we go to, so that's basically all of chapter 24. So chapter 24 verse 1, וידבר יהוה אל משה לאמור, צב את בני ישראל ויקחו אליך שמן זית זך כפית למאור לחלות נר תמיד מחוץ לפרוכת העדות באוהל מועד, יערוך אותו אהרון מערב עד בוקר לפני יהוה תמיד. חוקת עולם לדורותיכם, על המנורה הטהורה יערוך את הנרות לפני יהוה תמיד. ולקחת, verse 5, ולקחת סולת ועפית אותה 12 חלות 2 עשרונים, יהיה החלה האחד, שמת אותם 2 מערכות 6 המערכת על השולחן הטהור לפני יהוה. verse 7, ונתת על המערכת לבונה זכה, והייתה ללחם לאזכרה אישה ליהוה אחינו לפני יהוה תמיד, מאת בני ישראל הברית עולם, הייתה לאהרון ולבניו ואכלוהו במקום קדוש, כי קודש קודשים הוא לא, קודש קודשים הוא לא מאישי יהוה חוק עולם. verse 10, ויצא בן אישה ישראלית והוא בן איש מצרי בתוך בני ישראל, וינצו במחנה בין הישראלית והאיש הישראלי, ויקוב בן האישה הישראלית את השם ויקלל, ויביא אותו אל משה ושם אמו.
Melech, I had a question on the last verse where they were preparing the showbread, the 12 loaves that they piled up. They were to do it fresh every Shabbat, according to what it says here. That means that they were baking it Shabbat. So it's different rules for the temple than for our homes. It's something that somebody pointed out.
All right, let's look at these verses then. So I'm in verse 5. So ולקחת סולת ועפית אותה 12 חלות 2 עשרונים, יהיה אכלה אחד. So okay, so basically you're baking 12 loaves, 12 chalot, which are loaves, and it just gives the amount of flour to use in each one. ושמת אותם 2 מערכות 6 המערכת על השולחן הטהור לפני יהוה, so place them on the showbread table. נתת על המערכת לבונה זכה, והייתה ללחם לאזכרה אישה ליהוה, and with this bread you add לבונה, frankincense, pure frankincense. Verse 8, ביום השבת יערכנו לפני יהוה תמיד מאת בני ישראל ברית עולם. So it definitely says to set it up,
Yeah.
but it doesn't. You could get really pikayun here and say it's not saying to bake it on Shabbat. It's just saying to place them on the bread table on Shabbat, if you wanted to do that. So
Right. It looked like they had to be fresh. I mean, the idea I had was that
Right.
every week it was the start of the. I mean, those stayed on there for. They didn't do it every single day.
For a
They
week.
only did it on Shabbat, right? For the whole week.
Right. Well, they're not going to be fresh by the end of the week anyway, right? So
Right.
you could make the claim, yes, that it would be disrespectful, or it would be an abomination to God to not put fresh bread on the showbread, right? I mean, I think that's logically sensible, right? You're not going to give them
Mhm.
stale 3-day-old bread like that, right?
Right.
So yeah, it definitely had to be fresh. But one could make the claim, okay, but Yom Shabbat. So Yom HaShabbat, does that mean the Shabbat day, or are we talking about when Shabbat starts Friday night? Because
Hmm.
Yom can mean different things as well, right? So I could make a
Right.
claim, okay, they bake bread Friday afternoon, it's nice and fresh. They bring it as soon as Shabbat comes in, they bring it, they put it on the showbread table, and it's fresh already on Friday night, right? Just like we have fresh chalot on Friday night when Shabbat comes in, right? You could make that claim.
Yeah, it could be. That
Or you
could be.
could say-
Uh-huh.
Or you could say Yom means during the day, literally when the sun is out, right? So in that case, yeah, and then maybe they're baking it. I don't know, overnight. Maybe I don't know what to say. I don't think it's a necessarily foregone conclusion that they're baking the bread on the Shabbat. Is what I'm trying to say.
True.
It
I
says
think that
set it
idea
up.
of putting it out late Friday afternoon so that it's fresh for the Shabbat, the entire Shabbat, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. Because Yom
But it doesn't say.
can have its. It doesn't say. Yom can have its basic meaning, which is from sunrise to sunset. But Yom, by extension, can mean different things, including a 24-hour period starting from sunset to sunset, right? So
True.
it certainly could mean in this case that, okay? Or you might be right that maybe there are different rules. In the Beit HaMikdash, there might be different rules. I mean, there are offerings that are brought on Shabbat, right? That's certainly milacha, right? So,
True.
I mean, it even mentions it in Leviticus 23, right? The offerings that are brought on Shabbat. Where was it? Right down here. No, where was it? One second. Here in verse Leviticus 23:38. Okay. So this is speaking about, we start in 37. Emor de Yahweh. So these are the appointed times of Yahweh, Asher tikra'utam, which you shall proclaim. Mikrei Kodesh is holy proclamations, holy convocations. Lakriv ishel Yahweh, days on which you should bring fire offerings or burnt offerings to Yahweh. Ola umincha zevach nisachim devar yom biyomo. So you bring fire offerings and grain offerings, and also the libation offerings, each one every day. And then it says milvad Shabbatot Yahweh, aside from the days, the Shabbats of Yahweh, umilvad matnotechem. So aside doesn't mean that you don't do it on Shabbat. It means that besides doing it on Shabbat, also the ones that are brought on Shabbat, also the ones that are matnotechem, your free will gifts, milvad kol nidrechem, your vows, the offerings having to do with vows, etc., etc. So right here, it seems clear, excuse me, that offerings are brought, that fire offerings are brought, burnt offerings are brought on Shabbat, right? So what does it mean to bring a burnt offering? It means you have to slaughter it and pick it apart and throw it on the fire. It's cooking, right? You can't do that in your home on the Shabbat, right?
No.
So yeah, you could definitely make a very strong claim that yes, the rules are different in the Beit HaMikdash, because that's the pulchan, that's the cultic service that has to be carried out. Just like in Israel today, even on Yom Kippurim, everything stops, right? But still, there's some minimal amount of police working, some minimal amount of firefighters working, some minimal amount of doctors working, right? Something has to go on Shabbat for national reasons. So this would be a national reason why things have to go on Shabbat, right?
Right, right. And it's also using
What?
holy fire. The holy fire is a little different. We saw with Nadav and Abihu, the fire that wasn't the holy fire didn't work in the temple. I mean, I don't know. But also, I like the idea that
took the fire from the altar.
But also, I do like the idea that maybe Yom HaShabbat is different than a regular Yom during the week. I mean, perhaps the Shabbat is treated as a 24-hour unity, which is what we always do, Friday night to Saturday night when the stars come out, whatever. That's, to me, it may be that so because of that, you can put that fresh bread on the altar or on that table at sundown.
Right. Let's
and
look
that
at
way it's up
let's
there
check
for the
out
entire. How?
Yep. Yeah. I was gonna say let's check out maybe one or two of the commentaries. Let's see if Robert
That would be
Walter
good.
has anything to
That
say
would be
about
very
this.
good. Okay.
So Leviticus 24:5. What do we have here? Leviticus 24:5. Scroll down a little bit. It's a little bit larger. So it's easier to see on the screen. Leviticus 23. Leviticus 24:5. So he has something to say. I don't know what it is. 12 loaves. This sanctified number, of course, reflects the number of the tribes of Israel, as does the number of stones in the breastplate of the high priest. The bread in question is the bread of display or the bread of presence, blah, 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 showbread, laying out bread on the altar daily or even several times a day with the idea of symbolically feeding the deity was a widespread practice in ancient Near Eastern religions. And even today, I remember one time we went to a Hindu temple. I kid you not, I actually have video of this. We went to a Hindu temple and there was a sign there in front of one of the idols saying, "Please do not feed the god." Oh, do not touch the god? I remember as "do not feed the god." Any rate, okay. Jacob Milgram suggests that it was in order to distance this cherished cultic procedure from any notion of providing sustenance to God that this version of the law stipulates putting out fresh loaves only once a week. The inevitably stale bread could then be consumed by the priests, perhaps one of the less attractive of the sacerdotal prerequisites. Okay, well, he doesn't. He doesn't. Right. He doesn't say. He doesn't. He doesn't relate to it being done on the Shabbat. So let's see. Let's look at the Ibn Ezra. So this is 24:5, right? 24:5. Ibn Ezra. I've got to scroll down here. No, let me go back. Why is it not doing it? Come on, you. Okay, that's interesting. I think I just have to go back to the beginning here. Become a sustainer. Tanakh. Ibn Ezra. Leviticus. The more I get into the Ibn Ezra's commentary, the more he's really good. He really is. Okay, so he's not relating it to it here. Al Shulchan Tahor, Keneged Shulchanot Achirim, Sheish Am, Yehu Levado Mitzupe Zahav. Okay, so that's not it. Al Livona, Shaita. Okay. La'aron Abanav. No, he doesn't say anything about it. He doesn't say anything about it. Not that I can see. Tam Naskir Pashat Shemen Zayet. No, he doesn't say anything about it. We could check Rashi, just for the heck of it. So let's go Tanakh. Although Rashi's commentary is horrible. It's just amazing.
I don't like Rashi.
He's held up. He's absolutely horrible. I mean, it's one of the worst commentators I've ever encountered.
Absolutely, and he's the favorite in the Chumash.
Right. His stuff is nonsensical a lot of times. Okay. At any rate, Rashi, Leviticus, yep.
Like Rebecca was
24.
3 years old when she married Isaac,
Right. And all kinds of crazy things. But in all fairness, a rabbi of mine many years ago said that Rashi is not making this stuff up himself. He's basically just regurgitating what the Midrashim say, what a lot of times the Midrashim will say.
Right.
But still, he's definitely not Pshat. They always hold him up as a Pshat interpreter. He's not a Pshat interpreter in the least. He's not giving the simple explanation of the verse. Not even close. The Ibn Ezra is. The Ibn Ezra is great. The more I read his stuff, I mean, he's really, really good. And I don't know how he did some of this stuff without a computer. The entire Tanakh. He's amazing.
Exactly.
Really amazing. Okay. At any rate, well, where's specifically which verse is it that mentions the Shabbat? It's
verse 5, wasn't it?
yeah.
No,
it starts in verse 5 the whole thing, but it's really in verse 8.
Verse 8,
verse 8. So let's see here. Yeah, so Rashi doesn't have anything to say about it.
Nothing.
He does 7 and then he does 9. He doesn't do anything. So okay, we can look at some of these commentaries that are built into this website, this Bible Hub. Some of them are pretty good, actually.
Oh, yes, all right.
Let's see here. Oh no. Yep. Comment. So we'll go Leviticus 24:8. Some of them are Christian commentaries, so if they start talking about the J guy, then we know we're going down the wrong track.
Exactly. Yeah.
So just to skim ahead here we have the Eli Katz's commentary for English readers. Every Shabbat he shall set it in order. Blah blah blah. And the first of the time, and after the secularly done every Shabbat throughout the year. So of the manner in which the showbread or the bread was renewed during the second count. Them carried through where he's quoting it from. The authorities during the Second Temple took the expression continually to denote that the cakes were not to be absent for one moment, hence the simultaneous action of the two sets of the priests. Okay, whatever. Like they did, so skimming through here. No, I don't see anything about the Shabbat there. Being taken from nothing there. See here we have the loaves of bread typify Christ as the bread of life. Thanks.
All right.
Take fine flour, 2/10 to the half 13. No, nothing there. Every Shabbat, a fresh supply was furnished. Hot loaves were placed on the altar instead of the stale ones, which having lain a week were removed and eaten only by the priest except in cases of necessity. Let's see. Everlasting covenant. Let's see if there's anything here. No. The new, same time as every Shabbat. Nope, I don't see anything referencing about doing work on the Shabbat. Let's look at this one. Incense. Spread upon the cakes. No. Okay. Shabbat on the removal. A mincha, or most holy one, unleavened. There's a lot of things they're saying, but not specifically relating. So none of the commentaries we looked at, not the Ibn Ezra, not Rashi, not Robert Alter, not any of these other commentaries that are on the Bible Hub, nothing relates to the idea of actually baking on the Shabbat. So
nothing is said, so really can't take a conclusion from it.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Exactly.
I'm going to put you in the background while we eat our lunch.
Sure.
He's just getting up, and we're going to listen to you while we eat. Okay.
Sounds good. I'm just going to finish off reading in Hebrew to the end of the chapter. That way I could say we've gone through the parsha at least once, and then I'm going to end the study. So within another 5 to 10 minutes, we'll be done here anyway. So, all right.
All right. Sounds good.
Yep.
Talk to you later.
Talk to you later. Shabbat shalom. Okay. So we are in verse 10. And where are we? Leviticus 24:10. Vaytzeh ben isha Israelit v'hu ben, oops, I want to highlight this. V'hu ben ish mitzri b'toch b'nei Yisrael v'yinatzu b'machaneh. Second. B'machaneh ben ha-Israelit v'aish ha-Yisraeli. ויקוב בן האישה הישראלית את השם ויקלל ויביאו אותו אל משה ושם אמו שלומית בת דברי למטה דן ויניחוהו במשמר לפרוש להם על פי יהוה. God, so much to say about these verses, but I want to end the study, so וידבר יהוה אל משה לאמור הוצא את המקלל אל מחוץ למחנה וסמכו כל השומעים את ידיהם על ראשו ורגמו אותו כל העדה. ואל בני ישראל תדבר לאמור איש איש כי יקלל אלוהיו ונשא את verse 16 ונוקב שם יהוה מות יומת רגום ירגמו בו כל העדה כגר כאזרח בנקבו שם יומת ואיש כי יכה. Well, just wait. They don't need it right now. Put it down, and I'll just put it down. No, just put it down. Just put it down, and when I'm done with the study, I'll do it. Okay? Just put it down. They don't need it right now. Okay? Hold on. I want you. You want to hear these couple of lines? You ready? Yeah, hilarious. It's Leviticus 24:10. The son of an Israelite woman, and he and a Egyptian man were in the camp of Israel.
Yeah, I know this story.
Or among the children of Israel. You know the story? Okay.
Yeah, the guy curses God and then they kept.
Right.
Yeah, so.
Okay. Wa'ish ki yakeh. So at any rate, we're in verse 17. Wait, just 1 second. I want to say something. Who men ish? And say ben isha Israelit who ben ish mitzri b'toch b'nei Israel. Okay. All right. Verse 17. Wa'ish ki yakeh kol nefesh adam mot yumat. Makeh nefesh behema ishalmena nefesh tachat nefesh. Wa'ish ki yiten mum be'amito kasher asa ken yaseh lo shever tachat shever ayin tachat ayin shen tachat shen kasher yiten mum be'adam ken yinaten bo. ומכה בהמה ישלמנה ומכה אדם יומת. משפט אחד יהיה לכם כגר כאזרח יהיה כי אני יהוה אלוהיכם. וידבר משה אל בני ישראל ויוציאו את המקלל אל מחוץ למחנה וירגמו אותו אבן ובני ישראל עשו אשר ציווה יהוה את משה. And that brings us to the end of the parsha. It's late here, so I am going to say Shabbat Shalom, and Shavua Tov. If there are any last comments, let's see here. So we have a couple. Shabbat Shalom. Daily offerings at the temple on Shabbat are also fine. Baking showbread on Shabbat at the temple most likely sin. Right. I think it's completely reasonable conclusion. I think so too. Perhaps like other bakers who get up before sunrise and bake bread so it's ready in the morning equals as the new day begins, the bread would be ready to go on to the table. Yeah, that's an interesting point actually, because it says on Yom Shabbat. Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. I like that comment too, actually, that they did it, right before the sun rose. The bread is ready. As the sun rises, it goes onto the table. Yes, it is nothing. It doesn't prove the not doing of melacha, of work on Shabbat, but it does give some context or some possible explanation to the verse where it says on the day of the Shabbat. That's actually a very interesting point because, right, it says, let's find it here, right, on the day of the Shabbat, verse 8, B'yom Shabbat, on the day of Shabbat, B'yom Shabbat, on each week on the day of the Shabbat, Yarchenu, they shall set it up, Lifnei Yahweh Tamid, before Yahweh eternally, Me'et B'nei Yisrael B'rit Olam, etc., by the children of Israel as an eternal covenant. So yes, it says each Shabbat day. So that is very interesting. So that it was all ready to go. Like bakers, they got up before the sun rose, and then once the sun rose, they placed the new bread on the showbread. Yes, they were doing milacha after the Shabbat had already come in, assuming Shabbat starts the previous night, Friday night or Friday evening, right, as after the sun sets. But then they set it up once the sun rose on the day of Shabbat. I like that. That's good. So that's it. Any other questions? Any other comments before we end the study? If not, then I will wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov wherever you happen to be. And we will see you, Be'ezrat Yahweh, we will see you next week. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל יתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל יתן למות שלך, הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל, יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צירך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. אוי אוי מקימי מעפר טל, מהשפות ירים אביון, אוי להושיבי עם אליבי, עם נתיבי אמור. Nai 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 nai